I just wanted to show some quick tips on how to mark your knitting machine if you're doing lace patterns. This one's a little bit different than the ones I've done before. Normally you would have an eyelet on each side of this double decrease, but in this case the eyelets end up in the concave area of the scallop. And so in order to achieve the eyelets side by side, they have to be done on alternate rows. In this sample I did a double E-wrap cast on, and then I reformed the stitches on the second row to make a two-row garter stitch. And then I did several rows of the pattern, and then again here I reformed some of the stitches, or one row at the end of the scallop. I reformed the stitches to make a double row garter stitch here, and then I continued on with the rest of my sweater. On the sample fabric that I got this idea from is a course on Craftsy by Linda Lee, and she had some fabric and she was showing how you can sew on tricky fabrics, and there was a striped sweater knit fabric that she was using. So I did a screenshot and I figured out how they were getting these eyelets side by side. But I want to show you how I marked up my machine bed to make it easier for me to hand manipulate these stitches. I found this tape in my stash, and I don't remember where I got it from. I think you can find it where you buy the painter's masking tape, but it's a little bit thicker than your normal masking tape, and it's sort of textured. But I'm sure you could use any masking tape. But I laid a strip of it down on a little cutting mat, and I cut with my rotary cutter 1/4 inch strips so that I could fit it on the end of my knitting machine, or the top of my knitting machine where the needle slots are, and it fit just right. With this particular tape, it stuck down pretty well. I had to join, the pieces weren't long enough, so I just joined little sections of it so that I could use a pencil and write on it. And this particular tape stuck down to the metal pretty well, and it does not interfere with my needles at all. This is a Silver Reed SK840, so I had a little space here to put some tape. I was using a wax pencil, which these work pretty well because you can just rub the wax off when you're finished marking your needle bed. These work well, but I wasn't able to see my marks as well, and they do rub off, so I thought of putting the masking tape down and doing it this way, and it shows up a lot better on a video. So if your tape is not sticking, if you're using well, say some washi tape or something like that, you may want to get some alcohol and wipe off the oil in that area so that your tape sticks down. So I'm going to leave my tape on, so you might want to test a little spot if you don't want to leave your tape on permanently. And I've put my marks in pencil so that I can come and erase them and use this tape over and over again. For this pattern, I started marking my bed in the middle and working my way out. There are, I believe it's a 12-stitch repeat because each of the eyelets are right next to each other, and then there's 6 needles that have to be transferred over to this middle one, which they're going to double up on that. So I guess it's a 13-stitch repeat. And you'll probably need to figure out how many extra needles you need on each end. On my pattern, it worked out perfectly because on the left side of my pattern, the stitches are moving to the right, and on the other end they're moving to the left. So when I seam up with the back of my sweater, they should match up pretty well. So the way it helps me to remember is I'll have an eyelet here that's pointing toward the one that I'm going to double up on. So to help me to remember, when I have an arrow pointing to the left, my carriage should be on the left. So when my carriage is on the left, I'm only going to transfer the stitches that are moving to the left toward this dot. And so when my carriage is on the right, I'm only going to be moving the stitches from the eyelet that points toward that doubled up stitch. So the eyelets have to be done on alternate rows, as I already mentioned. So that's the reason for that. So it really helps to have this written out or marked on your bed so that you can just do your pattern without always counting the needles. So this is just a close-up of showing how I marked my bed. And then if you mark from the center out, then you can be a little bit more symmetrical, and then you can decide if, in my case, the sweater pattern called for 79 stitches either side of 0, and it worked out better for me to go ahead and cast on 80 stitches either side of 0 so that I could have an extra stitch on each end to seam and then an extra stitch between the patterns. So this is the first time I've used this pattern, so we'll see after I finish the back. I've already finished the front, and when I seam them together, I'll see if it worked out. So if my carriage is on the left, I'm going to only be dealing with the dots that are on the left and all the 6 needles that make up that pattern. So this is a 13 stitch or a 6 stitch, or excuse me, a 12 stitch repeat plus 1, because you've got to have a place to transfer the stitches to. So on the pattern that I'm working on now, I wanted a couple of extra stitches on the end to seam with. So it worked out perfectly if I cast it on 80 stitches to the left and right of my center. So I have the extra seaming stitch, and then I have an extra stitch between the seam and the first hole. So this pattern worked out perfectly because on the left side, the stitches are being transferred to the right, and on the right end of my knitting machine, the stitches are being transferred to the left. So I think that's going to make the seam look a lot nicer. I haven't knit the back section. I'm working on that now. So I'm going to go ahead and try to show transferring some of these stitches, and maybe I'll just start in the middle. Normally I work from one end of the machine to the other, but right now my carriage is on the left, so I'm only going to be transferring the stitches that are from this left dot toward this doubled up stitch here. Again, since my carriage is on the left, that's a cue to me that I'm going to be transferring only the ones that are pointing or moving toward the left. So I've got this tool here. I think this one came with an old knitting machine I had bought on eBay, but I think you can still find these on eBay, and there's some knitting machine suppliers that also sell this. These were made for the standard gauge machines, and you have, if you loosen this, you can select as many. If you're using this with a bulky machine, you can choose every other needle, and that will make it, I believe, the 9mm. But I've chosen 6 because I'm moving 6 needles at a time. If you don't have one of these tools, you can use a double needle transfer tool or single or whatever. You can move the stitches one at a time if you want to, but it goes a lot faster if you have a tool like this. So I've really enjoyed this tool here. So I'm just going to tighten that knob down. So I'm sitting a little bit farther away from my knitting machine than I normally do. So I'm going to find that middle one just so that it'll show up on the camera. And I'm going to open up the latches with a little credit card here so that they're all ready for me to put my tool in. So I'm going to put my 6 hooks from that needle over, and I'm going to transfer them onto the tool. So I'm going to drop them behind the latches, close the latches because this yarn tends to shred. And then when I flip this up, I'm going to pop all those latches open. And on this machine, I found it easier to go ahead and push them all the way out of work so that it steadies the needles when I get ready to pick them up again. So all of them are going to move either one by one to the left or all 6 at one time. So what I want to do is empty that needle at that left hand dot. So I just moved these over. I used the sinker post to help me guide it. So all I can grab right now is 5 needles. because the sixth needle or a hook needs to go in here, but it's way back here with a stitch on it. So I'm going to slowly pull those 5 needles back out until I get close to that hook there, and I'll just tilt my tool and grab that 6th hook, and that's the needle that we're doubling up on because it is lined up with that there. So now I can hold all these stitches because I tend to drop the one that's doubled up, and I'm pushing against the bed, tilting the tool up and dropping all 6 stitches onto those needles. And I usually check right away in case I dropped one. I can go ahead and fix it now. So this needle is now empty, but it needs to eventually come back into work. But what I normally do is I go ahead and I just do all my transfers, and then I pull all the needles out before I knit the next row, and that helps it knit better. So that's really all there is to that pattern. So I move on down the bed and I skip this eyelet right here because that one is going to the right. I'm only doing the ones that go to the left. So the next one I'll do, and I can't get my sight right into it right now, so I won't do it, but this would be the next 6 that I transfer to the left toward my carriage. So when I'm done with that, pull all the needles out and knit even the empty needles. If you don't put the empty needles back in work, then the next row won't be correct. You can see that this was the empty needle last time because it's got this little loop. It's not a complete stitch because that was the needle on the right that I did on the previous row. So that's all there is to this pattern, and I mainly just wanted to show ways that you could mark your machine bed. Again, you can use a wax pencil like this. I got these on Amazon, and they wipe right off.